This interview was recorded on November 9th, 2012 at AIB College of Business in Des Moines, Iowa. It was conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. My name is Christine Ray and I will be the interviewer. Kelly Mulcahy is a court reporter who will transcribe the interview, and Jessica Lippard is a videographer recording the interview. Veteran Richard Dick Johansson will be our veteran for today. Can you please give us your name?
Richard Johansson.
Your date of birth?
February 2nd, 1923.
Your branch of service?
We were U.S. Army Amphibious Engineers.
Your highest rank you achieved? Highest rank you achieved?
Pardon?
The highest rank you achieved?
I came home as a staff sergeant.
Great. And what war did you serve in?
We were in the South Pacific, starting at New Guinea up through the Netherlands, East Indies, the Philippine Islands invasion, the large one at Lengay and Gulf, and then we finished up as occupation troops in Nagoya, Japan.
And this was in World War II, correct?
Yes.
Great. All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and begin your story. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, where you were born?
Yes. I was born at Newell, Iowa, February 2nd, 1923, at the home of my parents. Both parents were immigrants from Denmark. My mother came at age 8 with the Mikkelsen family. My father came to the United States at age 21. They met at Newell, Iowa, where I was born, in their home. I was the youngest of 9 children. There were 5 boys and 4 girls. I graduated from Newell High School in 1940. My older brother, Carl, purchased the Storm Lake Dairy Products Company in 1941. I was working for him at this dairy, bottling milk on Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941, that we all remember as the Pearl Harbor date when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I worked for Carl at the dairy until the fall quarter of 1942, when I enrolled at Iowa State University. The plan was that I would earn a degree in dairy industry, return to Storm Lake, and work in a family business. However, I received my draft notice from Buena Vista County in the second week of the winter quarter, which was in January 1943. I was age 20, and I received my 1A draft notice. This came in about the second week of classes, a winter quarter. And so I went to Buena Vista County and was drafted. The college, Iowa State College, returned all of my books that I had purchased to the bookstore and sold them back. And they refunded the tuition, and I was off to service. My brother Carl was 10 years my senior, still single. At an age 10 years my senior, his draft notice came first in June. He was given 6 months to sell his business. The problem was that there were not very many young men to be prospective buyers of the business. And so he had to sell it at a sacrifice. So it developed that both Carl and myself were on a bus, a Greyhound bus, leaving Storm Lake, the county seat town, destined for Camp Dodge, Des Moines, for induction into service. When we reached Camp Dodge, all of us as inductees were informed that a 4th Brigade of amphibious engineers was being formed at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And Buena Vista County was instructed to send as many inductees as they could immediately to Fort Devens. Carl and I were given an option during that week of processing whether we would like to go together to the amphibious engineer unit or whether we would prefer to be separated. We were given overnight to decide that, and that evening we decided, in consideration of our parents, that we would go our separate ways. While we were in basic training, it took place at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, Fort Devens and Camp Edwards, both in Massachusetts. I was transferred for about 3 weeks to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, to be trained as a field radio operator. After basic training, we were in 5-man pyramidal tents living on Washburn Island in Cape Cod for amphibious training, which consisted of 3- and 4-day problems making amphibious assaults on Martha's Vineyard. During this time on Washburn Island, one morning at 4:30 a.m., there was a tremendous explosion. None of us knew what had taken place, but later in the day, we learned that there was a demolition training, a group of 10 or 12 inductees that were being trained to be demolition experts. Something happened with the dynamite, and this training group were casualties. In the fall, with training completed at Cape Cod, due to the weather, we moved to Camp Gordon Johnston, Florida, for further amphibious training on the Gulf Coast. Our boat battalion moved to Florida, going down the East Coast with their amphibious assault craft, the LCTs, the landing craft tanks, and the LCIs, landing craft infantry. Those of us in the shore battalion, of course, traveled by troop train. In the fall, when the training started at Camp Gordon Johnston, we were on a training problem, but at night we had a severe storm that came up very suddenly, and 2 of the landing craft overturned, and we lost casualties there in training also. When we finished training at Camp Gordon Johnston, those of us from the Middle West were given 10-day furloughs. We pretty well knew that when this furlough was over, we would be leaving the States. Whether we would go to Europe or South Pacific, we had no knowledge, but we were quite sure we would be leaving. And so I made arrangements to visit family at home in northwest Iowa at Newell, but I had an older brother, Ted, who was a Navy flight instructor at Pensacola, Florida. He wrote me a note and said he was quite certain we would be shipping out overseas. So please, could I try to come overnight and stay with he and his wife and their new little infant, my niece. And so I made it back early to Pensacola. He was able to check out a Navy seaplane, a flight training plane, and he took me for a ride out over the bay and over the New Orleans area and back to Pensacola, where we landed on the water. This was a tremendous thrill. Then, as we departed Camp Gordon Johnston, we traveled by troop train to Camp Stoneman, California. We arrived there April 23rd, 1944. We were processed there in less than a week, about 6 or 7 days. Then we departed for the South Pacific. On the troop ship, which was a Liberty ship, we had no naval escort, and the ship had only a small amount of protection. All they had was 50 caliber machine guns. And keep in mind, at this time, the Japanese had very strong control of the South Pacific in the form of surface vessels and also submarines. But we were very fortunate. We arrived at Milne Bay, New Guinea, May 15th, 1944. We were 22 days at sea. Milne Bay is the most southernmost part of New Guinea. We were told that this area was the second highest area in the world for rainfall, exceeded only by the island of Java, which had slightly more rainfall. But I feel that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this picture is an illustration of the mud conditions that we encountered at our first stop overseas. At this location, we were living in 5-man pyramidal tents again, and I had a tent mate who was the company mail clerk. He had a difficult time getting acclimated to living in the field. One morning, as we awoke, he pulled his duffel bag out through the back wall of the tent into the mud and started trudging away, telling the 4 of us that he was going home. Well, we informed at Reveille, this was at Reveille at 5:30 in the morning. We told our first sergeant about it. He directed a couple of members of the company to retrieve him, and he was taken through the medics to a hospital ship and returned to the United States. Our move from Milne Bay, the first move was up to Oro Bay, northward up the coast of New Guinea. This was not an invasion, but mostly an exercise to acclimate us, to train us for what was to come later. We were at Oro Bay from June 28 to August 17th, 1944. I remember about Oro Bay that it was very hot, in the area of 105 to even 110 degrees most days. And we received a lot of training there about how to prevent mosquito bites by the Anopheles mosquito, because this transmits malaria. I very closely used instructions to take the Atabran tablet that we needed every day. I used the mosquito netting over my army cot every night, and I was very fortunate not to ever contact malaria fever. We were at Oro Bay 50 days, and leaving, as I said, on August 17th. The next stop was northward again to Aitapi, New Guinea. We were there August 21st to September 10th, 1944. This is 20 days, and those days were used as a staging operation, instructing us about what the shoreline was going to be, what we were going to counter when we had our first invasion, which was to be invasion of an island north of New Guinea. We made the invasion on Morotai Island, which is just a short distance north of New Guinea. That D-Day arrival there for the invasion was September 15th, 1944. We had been cautioned that this island was almost solid coral rock. No nice sand beaches, which are ideal for amphibious assaults, but solid coral rock. We could not dig a foxhole, and we had lots of air raids there. So we were taught to fill sandbags with sand, and we built in place of a foxhole, we built our shelters above ground, right at the rear of our tents. During the invasion, I was to drive a Jeep off the landing craft, the LCT, the tank. My Jeep was at the rear of the landing craft. It was cabled to a truck in front of the Jeep. The truck in turn had a very long cable attached to the front. This was because of the coral rock that we were landing on, and the plan was for the ramp to go down, to use the long cable at the front of the truck to attach it to a D6 Caterpillar tractor, which would be on land waiting to aid us. The problem was, there are always problems with amphibious assaults. And the problem this day was that as the ramp went down on our landing craft, those craft had twin diesel engines. And as the ramp went down, one of the engines failed. This created a huge problem, and from the tide, our landing craft started, the water was taking us in reverse. Well, the long cable was attached to the Caterpillar, and fortunately, the operator of the D6 Caterpillar was aware of what had taken place. He gave his Caterpillar full throttle, which pulled the truck ashore as the craft was reversing due to the tide. And when I went off the end of the ramp with the Jeep, I was in deep water, the Jeep is sinking. I was floating on my chest, grasping the steering wheel. We made it to the shore safely. In about 20 minutes, the Jeep started because it had been waterproofed by the motor pool. And I was very fortunate and real pleased to be on solid ground. We were on Morotai from September 15th to December 31st. This was 107 days. During those 107 days, we had more than 300 air raid alerts. Our 5-man pyramidal tents were very well shattered with shrapnel holes from all of those air raids. We were very fortunate that we had the foxholes above ground, and we were able to withstand with very few casualties. And at Morotai, I considered that one of General Douglas MacArthur's very brilliant plan, because Morotai Island was a part of the group of the Halmahera Islands. The biggest island of the group was Halmahera. This was 12 miles across the water. And on Halmahera were 40,000 well-armed, a garrison of 40,000 Japanese troops. We never set foot on Halmahera Island. Those troops were just starved out. And we had very few casualties on Morotai, and only 14 Japanese prisoners were taken there. With this garrison of troops on Halmahera and what took place at Morotai, I regard it as very brilliant military strategy. I've always admired General MacArthur for that. On Morotai, after the invasion, in about 2 weeks, our unit assisted in preparation of a fighter strip that would accommodate our fighter planes. This was an air base where fighter planes could land and leave, which gave the Air Force a great larger area for fueling and flying out of Morotai. When we left Morotai, we had been briefed for the next invasion, which was known to us to be part of the Philippine Islands. We didn't know the precise landing place, but we knew it would be on Luzon, which is the largest island of the Philippines. We later learned that we found that we were invading Lingayen Gulf, which is a large area, about 20 miles of coastline on Luzon. But here we had an ideal sandy beach. We were briefed on Morotai, and in preparation for invasion at Lingayen Gulf, the U.S. Navy had access to almost all of their vessels because the Navy was freed from the campaign in Europe. On the way to the Philippine Islands, this invasion was involving 175,000 troops and a fleet of 850 or more naval vessels. We could go up on deck and turn in a circle of 360 degrees and see vessels of all types to the horizon, a huge fleet. There were destroyers and cruisers and battleships and aircraft carriers, every type of naval vessel available. Well, we departed Morotai the last day of the year, December 31st, 1944. And S-Day was for landing. The first landing on Luzon at Lingayen Gulf was to be January 9th, 1945. Our unit was to put the 158th Regimental Combat Team of Infantry. They were attached to the 31st Infantry Division, and our job was to put them on the beach, S+2, January 11th. We were at anchor out in the bay, and bombardment from battleships, cruisers, and destroyers took place for 4 days and 4 nights It never got quiet, and it never got dark, because at night they were discharging white flares. We went in, as I said, on January 11th, and this was where the Japanese had two huge cannon up in the mountaintops. The mountains were about 20 miles inland, and they had two huge cannons mounted on narrow gauge rails up in the mountaintops. They would run the cannon out on the rails and bombard us on the beach. After they fired, they would retract them. This took place while we were trying to unload supplies. This was part of our job after the initial invasion, to supply the quartermaster with everything: food, clothing, ammunition, and all. I think it was the third day that we were on the beach. One morning at dawn, our heavy equipment operator asked me if I was acquainted with one of his Caterpillar operators. His name was Virgil Jones. I was from headquarters company, and Virgil was company D, but I said, "Yes, Lieutenant, I know him very well." He said, "Well, he's about 1.5 miles up the beach, and we need him down here where we're unloading these supplies. Would you hike down there and ride back with him?" So on the way down, we had the three red flares for an air raid alert. I had no place for protection except to just lie prostrate on my chest on the ground, and I looked left and right, and there we had unloaded 50 caliber machine gun supplies. Piles of 50 caliber machine guns in wood crates as large as a small house. I was laying right between them. The Japanese Zero that brought on the air raid was approaching from inland, and I thought, well, if he drops his bomb in my area, it's probably my time. So I laid flat on the ground, and I just orally prayed the Lord's Prayer. When he reached the water area coming from inland, he dropped something from under the wing of his Zero, small fighter plane. There was no explosion, which told me, I could see right away, he was dropping his auxiliary fuel tank to lighten the weight of his craft to take him a longer distance to return to his base. Again, I was very blessed. On Lingayen Gulf, when we got established there, our unit built the Base M hospital there, which was a fairly large project, and we earned a presidential citation for completing that in rapid time. We were very proud of that accomplishment. Then we departed Lingayen Gulf the 23rd of September, 1945. The atomic bombs had been dropped and the Japanese had surrendered, and we arrived at Nagoya, Japan, October 26, 1945, as occupation troops. We were at anchor in Wakayama Harbor for 30 days. This was where we had been briefed to invade. It took the U.S. Navy 30 days to clear that harbor of mines, and so we had to wait 30 days to disembark. But this is what we would have encountered had we gone ahead with the invasion. And so the use of the atomic bomb prompted the Japanese surrender. I had enough points. We came home on point system, 1 point for each month in service, 2 points for each month overseas. And so I was eligible to depart Nagoya December 18th, 1945. We reached Vancouver Barracks, Washington on January 8th, 1946. There was a railroad union strike at that time, and so we could not depart for a period of 10 days. But President Truman ordered the union to return to work, not especially to transport troops home, but mostly because freight in those days moved almost entirely by train. And he ordered the railroad union to go back to work. But this provided us passenger trains to take those of us to the Middle West. I received my honorable discharge at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas in January of 1946 after entering the Army in January 1943. Now, I would like to close with just one, my small world story. We like to talk about small worlds. I was employed in Des Moines until I retired on the day of my 65th birthday, which was February 2nd in 1988. After being retired for a few months, as many other people probably do, we kind of wondered about our funds, if we had enough to retire the rest of our days. I enjoyed being at home with time on our hands, and enjoyed being at home with my spouse. But we were thinking it might be well to have some part-time work to increase some funds for retirement. And so I found that the U.S. Department of Agriculture was badly in need of interim meat inspectors. Well, I said my degree was in a Bachelor of Science degree in dairy industry, which involved the milk industry, so I didn't know anything about meat. But that was okay. They would train me on the job in the packing house. So I was hired by the Department of Agriculture, and I reported to the meat packing plant on the south side of Des Moines in December 1946. I was told they would train me on the line, and the veterinarian that started training me was Dr. Jose Guadiz. In about the second week of training, we had been working all day from 7 o'clock in the morning until about 5:30 at night. And several of the other inspectors had showered and departed. Dr. Guadiz and I came out of the shower, and we were in the dressing room, and I said, "Doctor, you must be a native of the Philippines." "Yes, I am." "Why do you ask?" And I said, "Well, I'm not prying into your private life, but I'd just like to know where you were from because I have been there." "Oh, I assume World War II." And I said, "Yes." "Well, where were you?" And I said, "I was in on the invasion at Lingayen Gulf." As I mentioned, this was an area about 20 miles long. And Dr. Guadiz said, "Well, Dick, you have to be more specific because Lingayen Gulf is a huge area." And I said, "Well, when we got established there in about 2 weeks' time, our battalion headquarters was in a small village that you probably have never heard of. It was called Dagupan. He straightened up and looked me in the eye and he said, "Dick, I cannot believe this. That is my hometown." And I said, "Well, doctor, I have to ask you my first question then. When we were in the bay, they bombarded for 4 days and 4 nights, and when we went on ashore, coconut trees and everything were cut down like 5 or 6 feet above ground. Everything was destroyed. So what happened to your family?" And he said, "Well, the U.S. Navy alerted the village of the date that they were going to start the shelling. My father took us off to the foothills of the mountains, and we all survived. Our home, yes, was completely destroyed. Other than that, Dick, I cannot tell you much. I can't remember much because, you see, I was only 8 years old." Now, to date, Dr. Guadiz has retired. He lives in Urbandale, one of our suburbans. This is a picture of myself and Dr. Guadiz and his wife, Vicky, and we are very personal friends. He made certain that I would be a part of a group that were awarded liberation medals of the Philippines. From knowing that I was a part of that invasion, he made sure that I was included in a group that were awarded the Philippine Liberation Ribbon. We're very close friends today. That pretty well winds up my experience. I felt that it would be good to submit. There were not large numbers of amphibious units. We were just the 4th Brigade. The 1st and 2nd Brigades participated in the European invasions. We went the other direction to the South Pacific. And I feel that my experience, I was age 20 when I entered service, came out at age 23. I learned there that military discipline is probably a good thing for a young man that's 20 years of age, because I learned there that an order is not a request. An order is an order. And I think that discipline helped to prepare me for my later life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll go ahead and we'll zoom in on your pictures that you have
I have,
and let you talk about those.
I have a couple of pictures in this book. Was authored by one of our comrades. He's no longer living. This is a picture of 6 Iowans. And again, I feel very blessed because I think of the 6 of us, I believe I am blessed to be the only one still living. But these 5 other guys, we were all Iowans. And that picture was taken in the Philippines. This is a picture that's also a part of that book. This was taken north of Lingayen Gulf. This was a flag that was taken from a small Japanese tank that was operated by a crew of 3. That tank had been destroyed. This flag came from it. And that picture was taken about 10 or 12 miles north of Lingayen Gulf.
Can you tell me about your medal again?
This was awarded from the Philippine government. The Philippine American Association in Des Moines had an observance of that out at the Iowa National Guard Armory. And my friend Dr. Guadiz informed me about it because he wanted me to be a part of that award. And this was awarded by the Philippine government. I felt that perhaps this was our first stop to acclimate us to living in the field. And it was indeed hard to cope with that mud. It was the second highest rainfall, as I mentioned, second only to the island of Java, and we had mud to contend with, but then the next move was northward up the coast of New Guinea. Those were hard years, yes, but I'd do it all over again.
Now, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us that we have not covered, or do you think we hit it all?
Well, a few years ago, I was invited to a school observance of Veterans Day. I was invited out, I believe it might have been 2008, about 4 years ago, to a middle school out in the east side of Des Moines, May Goodrell Middle School. And they had an observance of Veterans Day, and so we had a group of 800 students in the auditorium there. And I prepared a presentation there, so I used some of that same material for today. I thought it was a very good experience for middle schoolers. I wondered, going into it, how would the attention span be? Those students were very interested. The discipline was excellent, and I thought it was so good for students at middle school age to hear that presentation. And I'm very pleased to be part of today too, and I think it's excellent what the American Institute of Business has done to observe this history of World War II. I think it's good for the current generation to know it. We hesitated for many years to talk about it. I didn't even talk much about it even to my wife of 63 years, or our 4 children, until in 1996 we had our first unit reunion in Kansas City. And Mary and I attended that, and we had a fairly sizable group of comrades there. We got together and we reenacted and rethought of all of those experiences, the fun times and the difficult times, but that's when we started to talk a little bit about it. For the most part, right after the end of the war, we just wanted to return to civilian life and get started, and so I enrolled at Iowa State University right away in March of 1946. And with the help of the GI Bill, that helped us with tuition and purchase of books. I will always appreciate that so much. I earned my degree, bachelor's degree in dairy industry there, but I acquired something more important. I met my spouse there. And we have been, by next June, will be 64 years. We have been blessed with a family of 2 girls and 2 boys. We count our blessings every day. And so I think that pretty well sums up my experience. Do you have any other questions?
No, I think I'm good. I really enjoyed hearing everything. This concludes the Veteran History Project interview with Dick Johansson. Thank you so much for attending AIB's Veteran History Project, and thank you so much for your service.
I enjoyed participating, and thank you, all of you volunteers. I think it's a wonderful project. Thank you.